getting small opportunities in different organizations is the way to start to build your CV.
I think for me, it was trial and error to a certain extent. I think you do sort of try things, work out what interests you, work out what doesn't. I think a lot of volunteering experiences and internships and things, it's as important to work out what you don't like as it is to work out what you do.
We get a lot of questions about where people can find internships in charities and development, but structured formal internships are actually much less common in this area. One of the things that came out of our Charity and Development Festival was the variety of different ways that people build up experience that aren't necessarily a formal structured internship.
It doesn't matter whether or not you've done a bit of support work for a raising and giving society at university, or whether you've been abroad for a year, or whether you are getting your experience because you work in Costa at the weekends to earn a bit extra money, or you are showing your commitment to social change because you've got some caring responsibilities or something along those lines.
There are lots of possibilities when it comes to building up your experience in the third sector. Think of it like a patchwork blanket. All the blankets do what they need. They keep you warm in the metaphor, or they show employers what experience you have. But everyone's will have a different pattern. And the blocks that go into this patchwork blanket will be different sizes. Some things may take a lot of your time and energy and seem particularly significant. Perhaps it's a 12-week summer job or internship that demonstrates your ability to problem solve. Well, that might be quite a big block. But alongside that, you may have several smaller blocks, little moments that show your commitment and interest, like participating in a one-day fundraising event, or the fact that you've taken time to learn about a human rights issue, or even write about that issue on social media or in a blog or for a university or college newspaper. Or it might be the other way around, that those things are forming bigger blocks because you do a lot of them, and it's something else which is the small block. The point is, these things will come together to build up a picture of who you are, what you can offer, and why you want to work in this area. We're going to look at some clips where alumni and other people working in the third sector share their experiences, both from the perspective of people applying and from those who've done some recruiting, to see how different experiences can come together.
I've always done sort of charity stuff and volunteering since being quite young. I was like fundraising for Dogs Trust and Amnesty International at school and doing fun sales, and I guess all those sort of little things built up and added up into a real passion for the charity sector and volunteering.
So I volunteered every Wednesday night at a night shelter. And I would go and I would make food for the guys and just sit and chat to them. And it was beyond the highlight of my week.
So you might have the opportunity to volunteer while you're studying. And actually, for me, seeing on a CV that someone has spent 3 years doing something really sustained is at least as powerful as seeing as they spent 12 weeks working at an orphanage in a particular place. So it's very much about sort of the demonstration of willingness as opposed to necessarily having a particular project that you did.
So I volunteered for a small NGO in Italy where I was spending most of my year abroad. And it had projects both in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America.
When I studied my master's, I actually volunteered at a UK-based charity called the Mediation Service, which mediates between young offenders and the victims of their crime. So it's not exactly international humanitarian response, but there's some transferable skills you can learn there. So kind of I wrote funding proposals while I was there, which can be transferred to an international context. I worked with vulnerable people. Again, that can be transferred.
So I definitely recommend anybody who watches this to start understanding what digitalist technology is, do a couple of courses.
There is basically something called the Kaya e-learning platform, which is actually part of Save the Children UK's work. It basically has a number of introductory e-learnings and materials about how to enter the humanitarian sector. So we have like a Volunteers Essentials learning pathway, which kind of gives you the essential skills and requirements to be a volunteer overseas. We have what's called the Humanitarian Essentials course, which kind of gives you the main principles and policies of humanitarian response. So you can kind of learn the basics, let's say, that way. And even through just searching through the filter on this, like a library of courses and resources, you'll kind of get a sense of program management or finance roles, or you kind of see what's out there.
But, you know, for example, and there are a lot of courses on, you know, Coursera, edX, and you can literally pick up anything that you're interested in, like, you know, climate change.
So, for example, if you were to come and say, I want to volunteer at street storage, I'd be like, okay, why? Like, why us? You know, do you know anything about homelessness stats? Do you know anything about, you know, have you spoken to anyone who slept on the street? Do you know what the sector looks like in terms of how people access accommodation, what the big charities are, what the small charities are? You know, do the research before you look at internships and volunteering and longer placements.
When I did my master's, the thesis that I worked on was on sanitation, and I again worked. I linked my thesis to research paper with the World Bank, and that sort of helped get my foot in the door. Now, getting into an international organization is not easy. So I got a foot in the door. Everyone knew my name, but when I graduated, I didn't get a job. I did get more experience working in an NGO in the water at the nexus between development and climate. And then after that, I was offered a consultancy at the World Bank.
So my very first paid job for an international development organisation was at it's a charity called Send a Cow based in Bath, and they needed somebody to open envelopes for a postal campaign for a summer. So I went and did that.
I also was lucky enough to have some jobs working within global and public health that were really fulfilling. You know, as a research assistant, being in the lab, conducting some of that research and connecting with communities was really fulfilling.
And so I applied to be access officer for Selwyn. I just absolutely loved it. I was so passionate about widening participation and going back to sort of my hometown and talking about Cambridge.
There's many private organizations that work in areas that benefit development. So that's also definitely worth considering. And there it's more likely to get a decent salary as an intern as well.
The charity sector is a very diverse and inclusive place. And some people have caring responsibilities and busy lives. And I needed to work when I was at uni as well. So I was working in the college bar and working in garden centres when I was home and all that kind of thing. So it's a very accepting place.
I did a sort of short internship in urban planning. I did a sort of longer 6-month internship in sort of education programming with Nesta, which is a sort of innovation foundation in London, which is very UK focused, not internationally focused at all. But a lot of the skills I sort of learned within that about how sort of funds are managed and even sort of simpler things like report writing have been really useful in my job, which now is sort of working with international development organizations.
If you can say, you know, I worked as a secretary for a year in a city office, which is effectively what I was doing. It means I can communicate, I can build a spreadsheet, I can use emails, I can manage a CEO's diary, I can, you know, and that means in the charity sector, I can do the following 5 things.
The concept of pay came up there. We all know that charities and NGOs don't have a lot of money, and of course volunteering remains an important way to get experience. But our speakers were keen to point out that supporting an organisation with your time is not the same thing as being exploited.
You really don't need to be doing long unpaid internships. I think we're really getting past that, I hope, as a sector, because it's not fair. Not everyone can do it, and it really disadvantages some people.
Be mindful, I guess, when applying for stuff that, you know, if an organization has a recruitment practice where actually they just hammer unpaid internships, is it the kind of place where you want to work?
To recap, all of these things go into building up your individual pattern of experience. And a key factor of making the most of these is your ability to talk to employers and help them understand how your experience is relevant to them and the role you're applying for. See our video on skills to get a sense of the sort of things our speakers thought were particularly important to cultivate. And a video on networking will give you hints and tips on how to contact people working in an area you're particularly interested in for a more detailed insight into what employers in that area want.